When you need a lawyer, how do you find the right one? Contact the Chicago Bar Association.
Whether you've been injured or need a will prepared, whether you're buying a home or starting a business, having the right lawyer is essential. The Chicago Bar Association have lawyers who practice in most areas of law and speak a variety of languages.
Don't leave it to chance. Get a referral to a screened, experienced lawyer. Visit chicagobar.org or call 312-554-2001. The Chicago Bar Association. Se habla español.
Citizens who fulfill their jury obligation are continuing a tradition established under the U.S. Constitution over 200 years ago. Jury service should be looked upon as a privilege, not an inconvenience. Here to discuss jury service and its importance in our society are Justice Mary Seminara-Shostak and Mr. Anthony Baroni. Justice Mary Seminara-Shostak was appointed to serve as an associate judge in the Circuit Court of Lake County in 1998. She was appointed as a circuit judge in 2001 and was elected in 2002. She was appointed an Illinois appellate judge in 2008 and was elected to this position in 2010. She is the immediate past president of the Illinois Judges Association. Welcome, Justice.
Thank you.
Mr. Anthony Baroni is the jury administrator for the Circuit Court of Cook County. He has served in this position since 1998. The Circuit Court of Cook County of the state of Illinois is the largest of the 24 judicial circuits in Illinois and one of the largest unified court systems in the world. It has more than 400 judges who serve the 5.1 million residents of Cook County within the city of Chicago and its 126 surrounding suburbs. More than 1.2 million cases are filed each year in Cook County. Welcome, Mr. Baroni.
Thank you, Tim.
Justice Shostak, let me start with you. First of all, how important is jury service to the court system?
The court system will come to a halt if it weren't for jurors. Jury system is so extremely important in our country. As you said in the opening, it's a constitutional right. Sixth Amendment gave the right to trial by jury, as opposed to one person, the judge, hearing the facts of the case and making determination as to guilt or innocence or guilty or not guilty. 12 of your peers get to make that determination. I think everyone should be entitled to that. It is an extremely important right and one that should not be taken lightly and one that one should not look at as a punishment, but as your civic duty.
And I take it from what you just said that in some countries civil cases are heard by judges only and not jurors.
That's correct.
Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, as a judge, I always like to have the help from a jury.
Yes.
So no, I think I think everyone should have that opportunity. And I always say to people, you know, what would you want if you were sitting in that chair of either a defendant or a litigant in a case? Wouldn't you want the opportunity to have 12 people hear your case as opposed to just one judge? It's a great system that we have, the best in the world. And without the jury system, I think we can see, it's actually now that we have cases televised from other countries where just the judge is hearing the case, I think that should make our citizens see just how lucky we are to have the jury system.
This is a question really for both of you. Do you think jurors take their role seriously when they're being called, Mr. Baroni?
Absolutely. I think people take it very seriously. It is a burden, there's no doubt. There's a lot of sacrifice involved with showing up and performing jury duty. In Circuit Court of Cook County, we obviously understand that there's a lot of hardship involved, but the people who show up are almost always very active, very concerned and responsible citizens. So yes, I think they take it very seriously.
And Justice Shostak, I know in your prior life before being on the appellate court, you were a trial judge.
Yes.
And you were also a prosecutor.
Right.
What has your experience been in how jurors view their role? Do they take it seriously?
Oh, I think jurors take the role extremely seriously. Once they get selected as a juror, once they get in that jury room, you hear people say, and I'm sure Anthony hears it, you hear people say all the time, Do I have to go to jury service? When you're sitting in that room waiting to be called as a juror, perhaps it's not fun, perhaps it's not glamorous, but once you get selected, if you're lucky enough to get selected to sit on a jury, I think it is just one of the most wonderful opportunities. And then when you go back in that jury room and you determine the guilt or innocence, or you determine how much money you're going to award, maybe in a civil case, I think, and I have found over the years, that jurors take their role extremely seriously.
Let me just ask a follow-up question. Do you think, for the most part, they get it right?
I do. I would never question a jury, and one of the questions jurors always say to the judge afterwards is, did we make the right decision? And I always say, whatever decision you made is the right decision. You must move on now.
Great.
You know, don't dwell on it, just move on.
Let's talk about the mechanics of jury service before we get back to the issue of once they're selected and how well they do. And this question is to you, Mr. Brony. You are obviously involved in Cook County, which is one of the largest circuit courts, not only in the country but in the world. How are jurors selected here for jury service?
Well, in Cook County, we have a one-step system. The one-step system means that there is no questionnaire. They're basically summoned and sent a summons. The beginning of that process is we take the names from various lists, source lists, those being Secretary of State records, Chicago voter records, and the Cook County voter records.
So when you say Secretary of State, you mean driver's
license, state IDs, whatever information the Secretary of State has, they bring that to us. We then merge that into one giant master list, screen it for duplicates to the extent possible, and then summonses are randomly sent out at that point.
So I have a question. I know that years ago I had some friends who wanted to avoid jury service, and they said, I'm not going to register to vote because that way they won't get me. If they drive, they're going to be on one of those lists.
Correct.
Is that
or
right?
If they have a state
so
ID.
This idea that if they don't register to vote, therefore they're not
it's
part
false.
of the pool is just wrong.
Correct.
Okay. And so a prospective juror will receive a summons, and the summons will indicate whether the potential juror is being summoned for direct service or standby. What does that mean, direct service or standby?
Direct and standby is a mechanic that allows us to fluctuate our jury pool. Because we're summoning nearly 6 weeks in advance of the service date, we're not quite sure what the court need is going to be on any given day in the future. So what we do is it's roughly equates to about 40% of all the summonses that are mailed are direct summonses, and those people have to report on the date that they're summoned for. If you're a standby juror, you call the night before to see if you're needed. And that way it gives us the fluctuation to be able to increase or decrease our pool so we don't waste people's time.
Oh, that sounds like a great idea. So they don't actually physically have to come down.
No.
They can just phone in and find out whether they're going to be needed or not.
Correct.
So I have to ask you, what happens if they don't show up?
If they don't show up, initially there are errors in mail. There are just human error and scheduling conflicts. So if a person doesn't show up the first time, they're sent a letter with their next summons stating that they missed their previous appearance. If they didn't receive their summons and never got to them, they would call us to let us know that that happened, and we would resummon them. If they did in fact get it and chose not to come, it goes on to state that they can be held in contempt of court.
Justice Shostak, did you ever have any jurors come before you who had just ignored the summons and they had to explain why?
Yes.
Or
Yes,
and what were some of the reasons? Just because they didn't receive it, or they couldn't be there? Or?
Well, I think sometimes people think that their position in life or their job is just so important that they don't have time to come and serve jury duty. And that's what the beauty is of cross-section of your peers, is that you want people from every walk of life. You want doctors, you want tradesmen, you want people who work in the mercantile exchange, you want everybody. And so no one's job is any more important than the next person's job. Everyone has to do their jury service. So when I've had a problem with a juror, that's typically what it is.
So what, if a juror honestly believes that they cannot take the time due to having to take care of children or an elder parent, who decides whether or not that's a sufficient hardship? Where does that decision get made?
Well, a lot of those guidelines are set forth in Illinois statute. There are certain things for people who are on military duty are exempt.
Right.
If they have extreme financial hardship or some other stated hardships. When it gets into the gray area of what is a valid hardship, then it's the burden is on me as the jury administrator to determine, and we do that on a case-by-case basis. So by summoning, by doing this mass summoning, then each person will decide individually whether they can or can't serve, call us if they have a hardship, and we can make a determination based on each individual situation.
Now, do they send you a letter, Ms. Brony, or do they call you on the phone, or what's the best way to do it?
Generally, they'll
issue?
start with the phone. We have a juror hotline that they'll call, which is 312-603-JURY. They call that number, they'll state what their hardship is. 90% of the time will require some type of documentation to reinforce that hardship. And then once we receive that documentation, if it's valid, we'll grant them sometimes an extension, sometimes it's just something because it's temporary. Perhaps they're a seasonal worker,
right.
And financially maybe they can't work, they can't come down in the summer, but maybe the winter works for them. You know, Chief Judge Evans has made a concerted effort to make sure that we're as user-friendly as we can be. You know, you're not going to get a good juror if they're there when they don't want to be. If you can accommodate them in any way, they're going to actually be a much more efficient and effective juror.
Now, after you've made your determination that the juror should serve and they come down, it's my understanding that sometimes that actually gets to the judge as well. During voir dire, when they're being asked questions, they may volunteer to the judge, I have a hardship and I'm not able to be here. Did you ever have to address those issues, Judge?
Quite often, you might hear jurors say, and as a judge, you want to say how long you anticipate the trial may take. Some trials can be a day, some trials can be a week, some trials may be 2 to 3 weeks, and the judge should say that right up front. This particular case may take 3 weeks. The lawyers have told me this case may take 3 weeks. Does anyone have a problem giving us their full attention over the next 3 weeks? And at that time, you might have people say, well, I have a trip scheduled for work, I have a work obligation, or we have a family cruise set up. And at that time, the court would make the determination, because as Mr. Brony said, you do not want a juror sitting there who is worried about getting out on time, who is worried about missing a family vacation. You want them to give you your full attention, because that's what the litigants deserve.
What if a juror said to you, I'm in a sales position and I make my living off of commissions only. So if I'm not at work, I can't earn a living, I'm the sole support of my family. What if she said something like that to you? How would you respond? Would you still say she would have to serve on the jury, or how would you respond to that?
Well, I would say that there are a lot of people sitting on the jury who aren't making any money while they're sitting there. And that goes back to what I said before, Tim, is that no one is any more important than the next guy. Regardless of what your role is in society, you should be willing and able to serve as a juror.
This goes back a ways, but I was involved in a case down in St. Clair County, Illinois, involving a major company where there were 63 plaintiffs, and the jury sat for 3 years, day in and day out, except for some vacation time during the summer, and they did it without a complaint. So
that's the longest jury I think I've ever heard of, 3 years.
That's right.
They must have really bonded.
They did. They actually, I think when one of the jurors got married, she had the entire jury over to her house for a celebration beforehand. Let me ask a question with respect to where you go for jury service. Mr. Brony, I know there are several courthouses in Cook County. There's the Daly Center, 26 California, others. How do you determine where a juror is going to go if they're summoned?
Well, there's a couple facets there. In Cook County, we have 7 court locations. Basically, there's a court rule that sets up Roosevelt Road as a line of demarcation. If you live north of Roosevelt Road, you can't be summoned to the furthest southern districts, such as Bridgeview and Markham. If you live south of that, you can't be summoned to Rolling Meadows or Skokie. Daly Center, Maywood, and Criminal Court are all centrally located, so everyone's eligible for those locations. And the summonses are just randomly by computer selected and mailed however they fall.
So if I'm summoned for jury service, which I was actually last summer and went, how often will I be summoned again after I've already had that one service?
Well, by statute, you're not forced to serve again for a minimum of 12 months from your last service date. Again, because we take various lists, sometimes because of name differences or various inequalities in the data, sometimes someone's on more than once. They may get a summons before that year is up. They can choose to come and we'll take them, but they are not required to. So a minimum of a year.
We talked about compensation and how some people may have a financial hardship. Are jurors paid to serve as jurors?
Yeah, they're given a stipend of $17.20 a day.
And so that's just given to them at the end of the day after they complete their service, for example, if they're not chosen to be on a jury?
Correct.
Now, are there any other expenses that are paid for, such as parking or transportation?
Well, the transportation is encompassed within that $17.20. Parking at all of our court locations, we have free parking available, except for the Daily Center. At the Daily Center, they would be responsible for parking, which is substantial. So we encourage them to take public transportation because from anywhere in Cook County, you can get to the Loop.
Great. Now, I've read something about an opt-out program for senior jurors. What is that all
Yeah, that
about?
is something that was initiated almost 10 years ago. And what that is if you're over 70 years of age, you have several choices. You can, one, choose to change court locations because one might be too burdensome to travel to. You can choose a new date entirely, any date that you'd like. Or you could choose to completely opt out and not serve at all. And that has been provided because by the time you're 70, you've probably served many times in your lifetime. And as we get older, it's harder for us to travel the distance and dedicate that much time to jury duty. So that was a program that was initiated to help ease the burden for jurors over 70. But I will add that many still come, and they make excellent jurors.
Yes, I
Excellent.
imagine.
They're attentive. They're wise. They're prompt. They are an asset, and we hope they continue to come. But they have this program available to them.
Because I know sometimes you see seniors sitting in the courtrooms who are just courtroom watchers, and they just enjoy watching and seeing. And I imagine they would be good jurors too, because they'll pay attention.
Well, they have so much life experience to bring to the table as well.
Absolutely. This may seem like a silly question, but I think it often comes up. What can I bring with me when I go to jury service? Can I bring a laptop? Can I bring a book? Can I bring magazines? Is there any restriction?
In Cook County, you can bring your cell phone, you can bring your laptop, iPad, whatever devices that you'd like. You're allowed to bring food if you have certain dietary restrictions. Perhaps you're diabetic and have to eat at certain times. The things you're not allowed to bring in are basically whatever the security of the building doesn't allow you to bring in. Other than that, we're very flexible on what they bring while they wait.
And then do they have to take those, like say for example, if I bring my laptop and want to do some work, if I'm escorted to another courtroom to be asked questions, do I just take my belongings with me, or are they safe where I was in the
You bring your
picture?
belongings with you. You have to make sure your phone and your devices are off when you go to the courtroom when we make that announcement. And then if they're selected, the judge will instruct them from day to day whether they can return with those devices or not.
I'm not sure this is on the summons, but is there anything that says how I should dress?
There is actually, whatever is appropriate. If it's beachwear, it probably isn't
That would
appropriate
not
for
be
the court.
appropriate.
So we encourage people to dress appropriate for the court, and there's no hard, fast rule to that. Just generally no shorts, no flip-flops, no ripped clothes. People I think know what's appropriate.
Try to be respectful.
The court's a dignified place,
Correct,
so you
correct.
should honor it. But they don't have to wear, like for the gentlemen, they don't have to wear a coat and tie. They can just wear a nice shirt, pair of slacks, whatever that may be.
Exactly.
Good.
I always encourage jurors to bring a sweater because the temperatures of courtroom can change. Some judges keep their
point.
courtroom a little colder than others, and you should be prepared for that.
Good. And now, once they're selected, are they given instructions then about when to come and when they might be leaving for the day? How does that work?
That's generally the judge, whatever courtroom you go in. From that point, after they leave jury commission and they come into the courtrooms, then it's the judge who's directing them as to when to come and when to leave. If a juror is not selected during the process, then I always instruct them to go back to the jury commission to get their marching orders from the jury commission. But once they're selected, their schedule is made by the judge.
They're under the control of the judge as
Correct.
far as when they come and when they go.
Correct. And if they're in the jury room, up to 4:30 on the summons, it says to be prepared to stay till. So if they are not sent to a courtroom by 4:30, they're released at that time.
Very good. Now, I know jurors will want to know, prospective jurors, how long would I serve on a jury typically? Am I looking at weeks or is it days? I mean, is there some sort of average, Judge, that you would?
I would say I wouldn't expect longer than a week. I mean, certainly there are cases that are going to go longer than a week, but I would say 3 to 5 days would be the average.
And I know some jurors are reluctant to do it because they're afraid of what the lawyers may ask them in voir dire. And is there a point where the judge may think, if there's an objection to a question, that it's getting too personal, that it's putting the juror really on the spot, and that you will intervene to maybe prevent them from having to answer?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're talking about voir dire, and just to clarify for our listeners, when you go into a courtroom, the jury commission will send, depending on how many jurors the judge asks for or what type of case it is, the jury commission may send 32, 35 jurors to a courtroom. At that point, the judge typically takes 12 of those jurors and puts them in the jury box randomly and begins asking questions. And those questions are what we in the court system refer to as voir dire. And the court will ask you, there are some questionnaires that the judge will have and go through the questionnaire, and then the lawyers will have an opportunity to each ask questions to the jurors. Because what the lawyers want to do is they want to select a jury that is good for their particular client's position. So the state, if you have a criminal case and you have a prosecutor and a defense attorney, both of them are looking for different things from a juror. So each side has the opportunity to what we call excuse jurors. And they're excusing the juror for the reasons that they feel, well, gee, this might not be the best juror for my client.
So I shouldn't feel insulted if I'm excused and I'm a juror.
So nor should you feel, gee, I got excused from that criminal jury, therefore nobody wants me on a jury. You may not be the type of juror somebody wants for a DUI case, driving under the influence, because maybe you had a brother who was arrested for DUI. But you may be a great juror for a med mal case, a medical malpractice case, or you may be a great juror for a contracts case. So oftentimes jurors say, well, I was excused because of this reason. So each side has preemptory challenges, we call them. They have the right to excuse so many jurors if they feel, say for instance, it's a child sexual assault case and they had a cousin who was sexually assaulted. The defense attorney will probably say, I don't want that juror. They're not going to believe anything my client says. So after you go back and forth, then the judge and the lawyers get this jury, these 12 people, or 6. We can have a jury of 6 in this country if the parties choose to go that route. Then you have your juror, and then at that point, the judge is going to tell the jurors when to go, when to come, what type of evidence they can consider, what type of evidence they can't, whether they can use their laptop or whether they can't, those types of things. That's now the judge's purview.
Now, once the juror is selected and is on the jury, and let's say they have an illness and they can't come to court, so at this point, do they call Mr. Barone's office or do they call your clerk and say, I'm not going to be able to make it today?
Well, typically, depending on what type of case it is and how long the judge anticipates the jury is going to take, you pick alternate members of the jury.
I see.
So if it's a case that's going to go 3 or 4 weeks, you may pick 3 or 4 alternates, because God forbid something happens to a juror, then you can replace them with one of the alternates.
I do have a question. I'm a juror. It's going to be a very complicated case, and I'm going to be there for days. How on earth am I going to remember everything? Can I take notes during the trial?
Yes, you are given the opportunity to take notes if you'd like. You don't have to. One juror's memory is not stronger than another's merely because they take notes, but absolutely the court will provide you with paper and pencil to take note.
Now, we live in this day and age of Google.
Yes.
So if I hear something in court and I don't quite understand it and I'm a juror, can I go home and then Google it and figure it out myself?
The beautiful thing about jury service is you have no homework. Everything you have to know about that case is right in those four walls in that courtroom. You cannot do any research yourself. You cannot educate yourself. You can't listen to the facts and think, oh, gee, that happened at this location. On my way home, I think I'll swing by there and check out the intersection. You cannot do that, and the court will instruct you. You cannot research it yourself. Everything you learn about the case must come from the litigants, the lawyers, the witnesses from the witness stand.
And with respect to what law should I apply, how would I know that?
At the end of the case, the judge will instruct you on the law. They're called jury instructions. The judge and the lawyers work together and prepare these jury instructions. They're given to the jurors to take back into the jury room with them when they begin their deliberations.
Very good. And I just have one final question. So I finished my jury service. I voted for a verdict, and I leave the courtroom, and the lawyers for both sides or one of the sides wants to talk to me and ask questions. Can they do that?
Well, what I often do is I have the lawyers come to me right afterwards, and they'll often say, Judge, can we talk to the jurors? And I say, well, I will ask them. That's entirely up to them. And so when I go back to talk to the jurors before I release them, I say, the lawyers would like to speak to you. If you would like to speak to them, they will be waiting outside in the hall. If you do not want to speak to them, just go on your way, and they will not bother you. So I leave that entirely up to the jurors.
And if it's a big case, they might write a book and make more than $17.50.
That's right.
Let's hope so.
Anything else you'd like to say, Mr. Brony, with respect to jurors and prospective jurors in terms of their service or requirements?
Just that, you know, that they shouldn't be afraid to call if they do have hardships. You know, again, we're here to help. There's also a new law in Illinois that went into effect January 1st of 2012, which allows people with permanent and full disabilities to be permanently excused from jury duty with the right documentation as well. So they should take advantage of that if they need it.
Justice Mary Seminara-Shostak and Anthony Baroni, thank you for informing us about the importance of jury service in Illinois. I'm Tim Eaton. Thank you for watching Justice and Law Weekly.
When you need a lawyer, how do you find the right one? Contact the Chicago Bar Association.
Whether you've been injured or need a will prepared, whether you're buying a home or starting a business, having the right lawyer is essential. The Chicago Bar Association have lawyers who practice in most areas of law and speak a variety of languages.
Don't leave it to chance. Get a referral to a screened, experienced lawyer. Visit chicagobar.org or call 312-554-2001. The Chicago Bar Association. Se habla español.
Do you or someone you know owe your boss or recruiter money? Is someone forcing, tricking, or coercing you or someone you know to work or to engage in sex acts in exchange for favors or money? Has your boss threatened to hurt you, deport you, or someone you know, or hurt someone else if you leave your job? Is someone holding your passport or ID cards? If so, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline for help at 1-888-3737-888. Calls are confidential and interpreters are available.
This announcement has been brought to you by the Young Lawyers section of the Chicago Bar Association and the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force.